Still get asked, is emotional design really all that important? And it can certainly make the difference between products that resonate and products that don't. You know, there are a lot of times where we can make things that will function, but it doesn't mean that people necessarily want to use them. I think, you know, in product design in general, there's some really good examples of these kinds of things. You know, back in 2002, I believe it was, when Apple came out with the iPod, they didn't sell it as a 5 gig MP3 player. They sold it as 1,000 songs in your pocket. I think, you know, there are lots of other things that are sort of whimsical and have personality. There are things that feel good to the touch. There are things that, you know, as human beings, we tend to place sort of human characteristics on the things that we use in everyday life and things that can make us smile. Of course, Don Norman said, you know, attractive things, beautiful things work better, and that's, you know, it's sort of the science of the mind. It's the neuroscience. Dan Rome said, you know, the more human you make the picture, the more human is the response. So all of these things, I think, are great. You know, it's the difference between Macintosh and PC to some degree. It's also, I think we can look and find, if we're sort of conscious of it, we can find examples of these things in everyday life. But in digital, you know, there are very, very few and far examples of these kinds of things. We can certainly point to some. We can say that these are really good examples, but these are not standard. These are not typical. A lot of the things, as I mentioned, you know, there's a disconnect between sort of the things that we use and our engagement with them. And ultimately, I mean, what we do is we drive business. So if we make things that people can use, but they don't necessarily want to use, what does that mean for the business of your clients or the business that you're employed by? So this evening, I'm going to be chatting about one of the ways. I'll be walking through a case study of one of the ways that we actually did this at Acquity Group. But I also want to point out, I mean, this is a huge problem, and there's a reason for this problem. And the problem lies in the way in which we are taught. And so we learn about user experience and design and all of these other things either formally in school, or we learn about them sort of on the job as we're in a company or in an agency, and we learn about these things. We learn about usability and convenience, and we learn about all these rules and principles, and we learn about you know, even the language human-computer interaction. It puts the focus almost much more on the computer and forcing the human to interact on the computing terms. There's systems and interaction and heuristics and all these other things, and we learn metaphors. We learn, you know, principles like ease of learning. But you know, there isn't really a whole lot of emotion in any of these things. Ease of use, cognitive load. Even cognitive load, it's not the way that real people speak. Satisfaction and testing and monitoring process. And you know, all of this stuff, all of these things are fantastic to know. We have to make things that are usable, but there's a higher sort of order. And normally that comes along when the client says, make it delightful. So there's ultimately two issues with you know, this notion of delight. And I'll take sort of, there are a lot of very influential people in the user experience field who still talk about the notion of delight. There are obviously clients who ask for delight. Maybe your boss asks for delight. And my first question is, well, not everything is delightful, and not everything should be delightful. In fact, you know, humans are not, delight is not our only emotion. There's a whole range of emotions, and they're all useful, and they're all sort of valuable to us as being who we are. In fact, game designers, I think, have a much better handle on on leveraging human emotion. You know, not every game is delightful. There's something called fiero, which is sort of the emotion that you get from conquering something that's really, really difficult. There's schadenfreude, which is, you know, joy at conquering, you know, at watching someone else get defeated. There's all of these emotions, and I think game designers do just a fantastic job of getting into the minds of people and understanding what really drives them. You know, if a game is too easy, people don't come back to it. So there are ramifications around that. The other problem with this notion of delight is that all those things that we were taught, useful, usable, does not equal delight. So there has to be another layer on top of this. I think Peter Morville started to come up with a fairly good solution around this, and that, you know, he talks about a lot of different components and a lot of different elements that go into good product design, whether it's digital product design or anything else. I think he makes some good strides towards some resolution of this disconnect between the structure of a product and the emotion of a product. However, what happens is the way that he's represented this is that it still focuses a lot on the structure and not enough on the payoff, which is really sort of how you engage with people on an emotional level. So, my story this evening actually starts here. A client came to us and asked us, how do people find doctors? So it's a little bit of an unusual question. Not everybody gets these kinds of questions. Most clients who are in this situation would probably come to us and say, we're trying to redesign a doctor finder for members of a healthcare plan, and we want you to redesign it. Now, healthcare right now, if anyone's been paying attention, is an incredibly interesting space right now. So there are lots of things going on. There's obviously the Affordable Care Act. There are a lot of user experience things actually that are mandated in the act. Things like you must expose doctor ratings and rankings to insurance plan members. You have to expose costs. So there are a lot of user experience things built in there. And as I mentioned, at Acquity Group, we do get an interesting range of these kinds of questions. Utility companies come to us and ask us, we're mandated to raise rates. How do we not piss people off? We're mandated, how do we make this work better? How do we make our customers like us because something went wrong? But back to the healthcare thing. There is this notion both at the federal government level, at the state government level, within all sectors of the health insurance industry that if you expose cost and quality to people, they will shop for a doctor, they will shop for insurance, they will shop for a hospital, they will shop for different procedures and things like that, and ultimately drive down price. So that was the assumption. That was the assumption, and if we had gone with the assumption, we redesigned this doctor finder, it would have been meeting these kinds of needs. So, but the reality is that that's a very rational sort of approach, and human beings are not rational. Human beings are driven frequently by emotion, and then they will go back and they will rationalize the decisions that we made. We see this time and time again in research that we do. So the reality is that emotions play a huge part in decision making, and that I love this quote, we make decisions based on two things, a good reason and the real reason. The good reason is that rational thing. The real reason is it's what's in our gut or in our heart. So here's the other part of the problem. How do you get at what's in people's heart or what's in their gut, and what really connects with them emotionally? And at Acquity Group and a lot of other firms, we rely on design research. And so design research is really, it's grounded in a lot of different kinds of methodologies, primarily things like ethnography and anthropology, things that are grounded, Jane Goodall with the, with the chimps and Margaret Mead with the Samoans. It's like all of those things, observing people in their environment and understanding how they understand things, how they feel about things, rather than just understanding what they're saying, because frequently what they say is the rationalization of the underlying emotions. So this methodology is something that we use. There are a lot of hurdles to implementing this, either in-house in companies or in agencies, and I just want to address that for a moment. It's something that gets very, very little attention. Typically, both in agencies and in companies, we're very focused on things that are statistically driven, things that can be proven by numbers, because those are the sort of the rational part. You know, so it doesn't get attention, it doesn't get budget, it doesn't sort of get the approval of things that appear more rational. I like to describe this when clients aren't necessarily completely sold into the idea. There's footprints in the snow, and our analytics can tell us that there are footprints in the snow. Our analytics can tell us that somebody clicked on something or somebody did something, that somebody sort of swerved in the snow. But it's the ethnography, it's the design research that tells us why someone swerved in the snow. So both of those things are incredibly important to know, that somebody did something, but then also to understand why they did what they did. So understanding those kinds of things can get at the heart of the emotions that people are feeling when they're interacting with your site or your product or anything else. So back to my story. At Acquity Group, what did we do to find out how people find doctors? So we employed ethnographic research. We looked at a broad base of demographics. We looked at people who had different kinds of plans. We looked at people who were privately insured. Obviously, we weren't looking for anyone who wasn't insured, because this was for a healthcare or an insurance provider. We looked at men and we looked at women. We looked at different household sizes, and we looked at all these different things. And statistics would tell us that that's the right thing to do. You need all of these different metrics in order to get the right answer. This client was very good. They still had to have this rationalization, but really from an ethnographic standpoint, none of those things made a ton of difference. What really made the difference was the fact that all of the people that we spoke to were the healthcare decision makers in their home. These are the people that made the decisions either for themselves or their children or their spouse or their partner or their parents. These are the people that we wanted to talk to, because they're the ones who are emotionally committed to selecting the right kind of doctor to provide the care for their family. So we did all of that. We went to, as you saw, we did this in Chicago, we did this in Atlanta. We talked to people who were, had $1 million summer homes, and people who are sort of the definition of hardscrabble. We spoke to all kinds of people about the things that motivated them. And what did we learn? We learned several things. First of all, cost is rarely considered. It's interesting because that was the assumption. That's the industry assumption. That's the federal government's assumption, that cost drives almost everything. And from a rational standpoint, that would be true. From a rational standpoint, we could say, yes, cost is important, but we found that cost is rarely considered, even among those hardscrabble type folks who had high deductible plans, who you would think would be incredibly cost sensitive, were not. We also learned that people do not shop for doctors. What they do is they shop for products. The notion of comparing, looking at price, and reading reading reviews is a little bit different. That's more of a social activity, and people actually do things like that. But people do not shop doctors. We also found that people want more than medicine. Really, they're looking for sort of comfort and continuity and familiarity and things like that. Consistency and compatibility. People wanted somebody who they could relate to, somebody that listened to them, somebody that was nice. We heard people using language like that all the time. I'm looking for somebody who is nice. We just clicked, things like that. So after we went through all the research, we gathered the notes, we coded it, I'm sure a lot of you do this, you put things up on the wall with Post-it notes and all of that. And this is sort of what that looks like. What we found, those key findings, what we found is that it really is finding a doctor, how people find a doctor is really not like shopping at all. Everyone in the industry, from the federal government to the health insurance plans to hospitals, they're all looking to help people shop for doctors and shop for procedures. And what we found is that people do not do that. So think about this in terms of what that means for all these other firms, the other insurance plans who are creating these cost comparison tools. These now are not going to resonate with people at an emotional level because that's not how people engage with finding doctors. We found that it is not like shopping. It's actually like dating. So we heard people say, they're so nice. My doctor is so nice and he just listens to me. They're using language that describes a partner. They're using language to describe that sort of emotional connection that they have with people. And so as we're designing the products and services to engage with people emotionally, things that are useful, things that are usable, but things that also, we're not looking to design for delight. We're looking to design to satisfy a deep-seated emotional need, and that is to make a connection with another person. So that doesn't mean that we're designing Amazon for doctors or eBay for doctors. That would be a very different kind of site, and it would no longer resonate with people like you and me who are looking for a doctor. So I'll get to the more detailed design implications in just a moment, but one of the other things that we found that was really fascinating was the stages in which people move through as they're looking for a doctor, and you'll see I'm sort of a fan of alliteration, so start, search, select, sample, settle in. So in the past, before the internet, before all of this stuff, people would get a referral to a specialist. They would hear about a general practitioner from a friend, and they would go and they would sample. They would have a consult, may not like the doctor and go back, and a lot of time was actually spent in the sample phase. They'd see one, didn't like, see another, didn't like, see another, didn't like it. And actually what we found is that with the internet, the focus has changed. So now everyone, something like nearly 80% of people look for healthcare information online. Digital has changed the behavior, and it opens up an opportunity for our client to engage with people at an emotional level to serve a need. And so the real area of opportunity is in searching and making a decision, searching and selecting. Design implications from that. So we realized we're not designing Amazon, we're not designing eBay, we're not designing Best Buy, we're not designing any of these large, Home Depot, we're not designing any of these large shopping sites. So there's the notion of old metaphors, new metaphors, things that we could test. And this wasn't uninformed by customers in the end. This is, in this process of design research, we are always going back to the customer. So we went to the customer in order to do the initial research. When we came out with these hypotheses, these conclusions that we felt were very solid based on our methodology, then we came up and we did concepts. And we pulled in people again and we tested these concepts. And when we knew that the concepts were right, and then we went on to sort of detailed design of this application and tested it again. So there's always this constant feedback within the design research process of getting people, real people, involved rather than opinions. So opinions, and nobody's ever experienced that where your boss gives their opinion, but I'm sure it happens somewhere sometime. So, so the design implications here, I do want to talk about just a couple of them, because we were not designing something that was really shopping-based, that we were designing something that was more relationship-based. So rather than finding and searching, we're looking at matching and exploring. How do I look for someone that's going to expose their personality to me, that's going to resonate that way, instead of database attributes and things like that. We're looking at personalities and exploring that way. It's interesting because the client, who was very open-minded and they were a fantastic client, one of the best I've ever had. Sometimes they were still getting feedback from their marketing research, which is all statistically driven. And so that information was saying, our customers want more information. And again, that's the difference between what people say and what they do. So we had to be able to interpret this notion of people want more information to what does that really mean within the context of this. It's not all information, but it's the information that helps them make a rationalized decision based on what their emotions are telling them. So there was a lot of balancing there. Essentially, we went through the design process. We unfortunately we did the research, we did the design, we handed it off to our client's third-party developer who created the site. It's now since launched. It's working quite well, surprisingly. We like to be able to control the code and the development of things at Acquity Group because we tend to be sticklers for quality and things like that. However, it is quite good. And I've just got one screenshot here of what it actually starts to look like. Obviously, it's a very robust application. But again, during the process of this design, I signed up for lots of dating sites to understand, during the design process, how do those sites ask questions of me to match me up to someone else? And so there was a metaphor here that we were working off during the design process that really, on one end, this is very much like a dating site because people, because that was the key finding. It's like dating. So we wanted to be able to take appropriate cues from something that was already out there. On another level, from the doctor's perspective, the people like you and I are not the only audience for this particular product. Doctors are also a key audience for this product, and we wanted doctors to participate in this. And so in that regard, we made it much more like LinkedIn. So we basically took, not literally, but figuratively, we took eHarmony and LinkedIn and mashed them up together. So now we have doctors who are really excited about participating in this and providing content to populate this, because we're starting off with a baseline level of content that's available. And from the customer standpoint, now we've got members of BlueCross BlueShield who love this particular application. So all of that said, This is one example. I mean, I'm sort of proud to point to this and say this is a good example of being able to meet emotional needs of people. We can't guess. We never would have been able to design this to meet those needs without the design research. There are relatively few other digital examples out there. There are certainly opportunities. You know, I think digital certainly needs to catch up. And it's, you know, digital, I mean, you could really say that it sort of blossomed in 98, 99. So, you know, we're only 12, 13, 14 years into this, and yet there's huge opportunity. Design research is what exposes those opportunities. I highly recommend that given the constraints or the barriers that I outlined earlier, advocate for it in your own firms, advocate for it in your own agencies, in your own companies that you work at. There is a difference between, you know, there is a reason that Zune is no longer around and iPod is. And there are business implications to that. It's, you know, I think there's opportunity for us to create beautiful things that really work, really resonate with people, and oftentimes the statistical analysis will get in the way of that because we believe, there are people who believe that rationally driven products or things like that are the only thing that work, and that's not true. And you all can actually do this. I mean, you have a voice, you have a role, you're all involved in design and different kinds of related fields. You can actually do this. And that's my chat.